In the deep heart of winter, where the mountains of Iron Peak rise like ancient guardians and every snowflake carries a whisper of forgotten secrets, one stormy night would change everything. A lone cabin beside a frozen lake, a former officer trying to outrun his past, a mother and her daughter holding on to hope, and a loyal German shepherd who would see danger long before any human could. Before we begin this journey of courage, mystery, and quiet miracles hidden beneath the ice, tell me this. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I would love to see how far this story travels. Winter had settled over Iron Peak like a patient ancient god, draping the mountain town in layers of silver silence and sharpening every breeze into a blade. The storm that night was the kind that swallowed sound, the kind old-timers claimed could peel the courage off any man who dared the open woods after sundown. Snow whipped across the frozen surface of Frostfall Lake, turning the shoreline into shifting dunes of white. Pines bent like weary sentinels in the cutting wind. And somewhere in that wind, a voice trembled. A distress signal flickering through static, thin but unmistakable. Evan Calder heard it just after 9. He was standing on the porch of his remote cabin at the southern ridge, a lantern at his feet and a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. At 38, Evan looked like he was carved out of the same mountain stone the town was built on, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, with a quiet strength that people trusted without knowing why. But his face held a heaviness, a scar deeper than the faint line across his cheek. His wife, Mara, had died in what Denver police had called an unfortunate accident, the same explanation they had used for everything they didn't want to look deeper into. It had been 15 months since that night, yet grief still moved inside him like a slow ghost. Iron Peak was meant to be his reset button, far away from the city, far away from the case files he still kept locked in a metal box under his bed. Beside him sat Magnus, his 5-year-old German shepherd, a dog with the bearing of a wolf and the heart of a guardian angel. Magnus had a thick sable coat dusted with white along the muzzle, eyes sharp and amber like melted topaz, strong, disciplined, but with a stubborn streak that made Evan joke he had adopted a furry sergeant instead of a pet. Magnus had once served as Evan's K-9 partner during his last year in Denver. The two survived operations that should have ended them both several times, forging a bond that no badge or retirement paper could break. The distress signal crackled again, faint but urgent. Evan lowered his mug. "That's coming from the lake," he murmured. Magnus's ears pricked, followed by a low, rumbling sound deep in his chest. Not fear, but recognition that something was wrong. Evan stepped inside his cabin, grabbed his radio receiver, and fine-tuned the frequency. The message repeated, a short, broken burst of Morse-like clicking, old-fashioned, the kind people used before phones worked this deep in the mountains. No words, just a beacon. A plea. The storm outside growled like something alive. "All right, buddy," Evan said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "We're going." Magnus barked once, agreement. They trudged through the rising storm, snow clawing at their legs as the wind howled around them. Frostfall Lake sat half a mile from the cabin, bordered by a ring of cabins, some seasonal vacation homes, others year-round dwellings for those who chose solitude over convenience. Tonight, all of them looked swallowed by the blizzard. The light from Evan's headlamp swept across frozen trees, abandoned picnic benches, and a frozen dock half buried beneath drifts. As they approached the northern edge of the lake, a cabin window flickered, dim, erratic, as if the occupant struggled to keep a generator alive. That was when the scream sliced through the wind. A woman's voice. Evan didn't run. He launched forward, boots breaking into the snow like sledgehammers. Magnus matched him, stride for stride, moving like a streak of steel and fur through the storm. The closer they got, the clearer the sounds became. Shouting, something crashing, a smaller voice crying, a man barking orders. They reached the cabin. Inside, chaos lived. The front door had been cracked open, snow piling in. Evan stepped in silently but swiftly, his eyes adjusting to the dim room, lit only by a sputtering lantern. The first thing he saw was the woman, Aurora Vale. She was in her mid-30s, tall in a delicate, willowy way, with raven dark hair tied loosely behind her head and winter-pale skin flushed from fear. Her eyes were striking, green like forest moss after rain, full of both defiance and exhaustion. Aurora was the kind of person whose gentleness came with a backbone forged by hardship. Once a community arts teacher known for her warmth and creativity, she had grown distant and cautious after her husband's death 6 months earlier. A death authorities insisted was accidental, though her instincts screamed otherwise. Aurora was shielding her daughter, Lila, a small girl of 10 with freckles dusting her nose and hair the same dark chestnut her father once had. Lila trembled but held her mother's coat tightly, eyes wide with terror and stubborn bravery that didn't quite mask her fear. She was the kind of child who memorized bird calls, drew pictures of foxes with crayon-stained hands, and spoke more to animals than people. Trauma had changed that. She had become quieter, clingier, but still held a spark of hope. Across the room, 2 men towered over them. The first was a heavy-set brute with a shaved head, thick jacket, and a crooked nose that looked like it had been broken more than once. His name would later be identified as Dale Morgan, a hired enforcer for Pike Minerals. His eyes were flat, his smile thinner than cruelty allowed. The second man was leaner, gaunt, with restless eyes, the kind that darted around searching for exits or witnesses. His name was Trent Hale, another contractor type, wearing boots caked with ore dust. Neither belonged in a lakeside cabin at night, unless trouble was their business, and tonight, trouble was all they carried. "You sign the papers," Dale snarled, gripping Aurora's arm, "or the next storm is the least of your problems." Aurora winced, but her chin lifted. "This land is mine. You can't force me." Suddenly Dale's hand raised, ready to strike. He never got the chance. Magnus burst into the room with a growl that vibrated the floor. Evan followed, voice steady but thunderous. "Step away from them. Now!" Dale spun around. "Who the—" What happened next took seconds. Magnus lunged between Aurora and Trent, teeth bared, not biting, but warning. Trent backed away instinctively. Evan reached Dale before he could draw the knife tucked into his boot, twisting his arm behind him and knocking him onto the table with a crack that sent papers flying. Trent swung toward Evan, but Magnus leapt, forcing him to the ground in a flurry of snarls and panicked gasps. When both men were subdued, Evan cuffed them with the plastic ties he kept in his coat for emergencies. "Evan Calder," he said evenly, "former Denver PD. You're both staying on the floor until county officers get here." Aurora exhaled shakily. Lila ran to Magnus, wrapping her arms around his neck. The dog licked her cheek gently, tail low, but calm. Evan radioed the Iron Peak Sheriff's Office. "2 assailants in custody at Frostfall Cabin 13. Request immediate response." A pause. Then the voice of Deputy Hank Mercer came through, thin and oddly detached. Mercer was a longtime local, mid-40s, sandy brown hair always falling across his forehead, an unremarkable face that looked tired more than dangerous. He was known for being polite, quiet, maybe too quiet. A man who avoided conflict like it might stain him. "Copy that, Calder," Mercer said. "I'll log it. Might take a bit. Roads are rough tonight." Evan frowned. "This is urgent, Hank. We have a mother and kid attacked in their home." "Yes, well, we'll do my best," Mercer replied, voice drifting off. "Stay put." The line went dead. Aurora hugged Lila tighter. "They won't give up," she whispered. "They want my land. They've been pressuring me for weeks, but this is different. They said someone higher up wants everything cleared this month." Evan glanced at the 2 subdued men. "Who sent you?" Dale laughed through a swollen lip. "You think we talk? You have no idea what you're in the middle of." Magnus growled, deep and slow. Evan turned to Aurora. "You're safe for now, but Mercer's reaction worries me." Aurora looked toward the frosted window. "Then, whatever this is, it's bigger than us." Outside, the storm howled again, rattling the cabin walls as if the wind itself wanted to warn them that the night had only just begun. By morning, the storm had softened, though Iron Peak still lay under a vast shroud of white that glimmered like crushed diamonds under the pale light. The mountains towered above the town with their ancient stoicism, as if watching and waiting. Frostfall Lake, half frozen and half shrouded in mist, seemed to breathe in the cold. A brittle calm hung in the air. Too calm, Evan thought, as though the night's violence had been swallowed but not forgotten. Aurora Vale sat at Evan's cabin table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She looked different in daylight, still fragile from the shock, but her posture had a newfound steadiness, like someone gathering the loose pieces of herself and forcing them into alignment again. Her long, dark hair fell over her shoulders in a tousled wave, cheeks pale except for a faint, determined flush. Lila sat beside her, sketching something on a notepad. The curled tail of Magnus, then his face, then a scribbled snowflake. Children, Evan thought, had an uncanny way of finding light even after darkness. Magnus lay near the fireplace, stretched out like a furry guardian, ears flicking every time the wind shifted. The dog seemed unusually alert this morning, his instincts sharpened by the lingering scent of danger. Evan moved quietly around the cabin, preparing breakfast, though his mind was far from the sizzling pan. The men from last night had been taken by county officers just before dawn. Mercer never showed. Instead, 2 young deputies drove up the mountain after sunrise, wearing confused expressions and claiming they weren't told anything until this morning. That alone was enough to tell Evan something was wrong. Aurora watched him. "You're thinking too loudly," she said softly. Evan tried to smile, just wondering why 2 hired thugs think your land is worth breaking into your home for. Aurora's fingers tightened around her cup. "It's not the land." Her voice cracked slightly. "It's what's beneath it." Evan turned. "The hatches? The sealed structures I saw on the maps?" Aurora nodded, exhaling shakily. And for the first time, she seemed ready to unravel the truth she'd been carrying. "My husband, Rowan, he wasn't just a typical environmental engineer." Her eyes drifted toward the snowy window, as though the past lived out there in the trees. "He was meticulous, brilliant really, a man who could spend hours studying water quality patterns and forget he hadn't eaten. He loved Frostfall Lake. He said it was a living thing with a memory built into the ice." A faint smile touched her lips, then faded. When the lake started changing, he noticed first. Evan studied her carefully. Changing how? Fish dying more frequently, algae patterns that shouldn't exist in winter, tiny shifts in the pH that didn't match runoff or natural contamination. She lifted her eyes to his. He believed Pike Minerals was dumping something, illegally, quietly, and he believed the lake was absorbing it in ways that could devastate the whole region. Evan leaned back against the counter. Then he went to investigate. Yes, Aurora swallowed. He found something terrifying. I don't know what exactly, because he didn't want to panic me. But I remember his face. She closed her eyes briefly. He came home one night, pale as snow. He said he had evidence, photos, water samples, documents, and he said he needed to take them somewhere safe. He didn't make it, Evan murmured. Aurora nodded. A work incident, they told me. Equipment collapse. She scoffed bitterly. Rowan never made mistakes. He never overlooked structural faults. And yet, they burned his notes, his computer, even his field kit. Said it was contaminated. Lila's pencil paused mid-stroke. She didn't look up, but her small voice broke the silence. Dad never forgot things. He wouldn't forget safety. Then she drew another snowflake. Evan felt a tightening in his chest. He turned to Aurora. Why didn't you tell the police? I did at first, but Hank Mercer was assigned to my case. She hesitated. He seemed sympathetic, but he told me there was nothing suspicious, that I should focus on healing. After a while, he started avoiding me. Her eyes darkened. And then the letters started showing up. What letters? Aurora reached into her bag, pulling out a folded page. She slid it across the table. Evan opened it carefully. Printed words, no signature. Sell your land or lose much more. Lila shifted closer to her mother. Evan's jaw clenched. You said Rowan found something specific, Evan said. Did he ever tell you where? Aurora rose from the table, walked to her bag again, and pulled out a small waterproof notebook. It was worn, edges frayed, pages swollen from moisture. Rowan's handwriting, tight, precise, filled most of it. Aurora flipped to a page marked with a clipped piece of red string. It was a set of coordinates, right on Frostfall Lake, and next to it, Rowan had written 3 words. Old War Tunnels. Active. Evan's mind raced. These tunnels? They're from World War II? Yes, Aurora said. Iron Peak was once a military outpost. There were underground storage facilities beneath the lake. Most were sealed decades ago. Unless Pike reopened them, Evan said. Aurora's nod was heavy. Rowan suspected they were burying something in the old tunnels, something not meant to see daylight ever again. Evan walked to the window and stared out at the frozen lake. The wind brushed patterns across the snow-covered surface like ancient runes being erased and rewritten. Iron Peak's history was tangled enough. Mines, war relics, forgotten contracts between town officials and corporations looking to carve profits out of wilderness. But the idea of tunnels, under the lake being repurposed for illegal dumping, struck him with a peculiar cold, one that felt sharper than the winter outside. Aurora sat again, pulling her coat tighter around herself. I've been trying to keep Lila safe, trying not to lose our home, but I'm losing my ability to fight alone. Evan looked at her, the weight of her words settling in the room like falling ash. Magnus rose, sensing the shift, padding closer to Lila, resting his head on her lap. The little girl smiled faintly and stroked his ear. We're not alone anymore, Evan said quietly. But even as he spoke, he felt something lodge in his mind. Mercer. His voice over the radio last night. Detached, hesitant, evasive. The way he disappeared from the scene, the way he had handled Aurora's case. Something was very wrong. Later that afternoon, when the sky dimmed under another sheet of thick cloud, Evan drove with Aurora and Lila down to the lakeshore, intent on retracing Rowan's steps. The air smelled of pine resin and distant ice. The lake stretched before them, a glassy expanse fractured with pale veins where the ice thinned. Evan moved slowly, studying the ground, the frost, the terrain. Magnus walked ahead, tail stiff, nose low to the snow. Lila followed Aurora, bundled in a thick cobalt coat, boots crunching lightly with each step. It didn't take long. Magnus stopped sharply near a mound of frozen reeds, ears pinned forward. Evan hurried to him and saw it. A hatch, half covered in snow and moss, rusted, old, but not untouched. Footprints surrounded it, fresh, deep, scattered, some leading toward the woods, others toward the lake. Aurora's breath trembled. Rowan said the entrance was near here. Evan brushed the snow away from the hatch handle. It bore the imprint of a symbol, military origin, mid-century. But the frost around the edges had been melted recently. Opened, closed, not long ago. Someone's been using this, Evan murmured. Aurora stepped back, holding Lila close. Then Rowan was right. Evan scanned the tree line. The storm cloud overhead darkened. Magnus growled softly. Evan didn't open the hatch, not yet. But in that moment, he made a silent promise. He would uncover the truth buried beneath this lake, whatever it cost. And from the woods behind them, unseen eyes watched. Snow returned to Iron Peak with a quieter fury that evening, drifting down like pale ash from an unseen fire in the heavens. The storm no longer screamed, it whispered instead, soft, persistent, unsettling. Frostfall Lake lay beneath a veil of fog, its surface half frozen and luminous under the thin winter moon. In the distance, the mountain ridges curved like the spines of sleeping giants, guarding secrets that had waited half a century to be found again. Inside Evan's cabin, a fragile calm lingered. The fireplace crackled softly, radiating warmth that seemed too gentle for a night burdened with danger. Aurora Vale sat curled on the old leather couch. Lila pressed against her side, drawing Magnus's face onto a scrap of paper. Magnus himself lay by the door, eyes half closed but alert, every muscle ready to rise at the slightest shift in the night. Evan stood by the window, watching the snow drift through the yellow glow of the porch lantern. His breath fogged the cold glass. His mind wouldn't quiet. The hatch beneath Frostfall Lake was real. The footprints were real. And Rowan's fear had been real long before his so-called accident. Which meant the threat surrounding Aurora and Lila wasn't random intimidation. It was part of something systematic, something orchestrated. Aurora's voice broke the silence. "You're doing it again," she murmured. "Thinking too hard." Evan gave a faint smile. "Hard not to. That hatch wasn't just a coincidence. Whatever Rowan found, it scared the wrong people." Aurora rested her chin gently atop Lila's head. "He wasn't a man who scared easily." Magnus lifted his head suddenly. A faint beep sounded from under the porch. Evan froze. Aurora stiffened. Lila's pencil slipped from her fingers. Magnus growled, low and dangerous, rising to his feet. Evan grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the cold. Snowflakes swirled around him as he crouched beneath the porch beams. And there it was. A small black device, no bigger than a thumb, attached to the underside of the wooden beam. A listening device. Freshly placed. Evan's blood ran hot despite the cold. He plucked it from the beam and returned inside. Aurora covered her mouth. Lila drew closer to Magnus, who pushed his warm body against her legs protectively. "They're listening," Aurora whispered. "Here, even here." Evan set the device on the table. "They're not just listening," he said. "They're watching your movements, and they're desperate enough now to track anyone helping you." He paused. "They're afraid," Aurora swallowed. "Afraid of what Rowan knew. And of what we might discover," Evan finished. Before he could say more, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp taps, carried weakly through the storm. Magnus barked once, steady but warning. Evan motioned for Aurora and Lila to stay back, then approached the door cautiously. He checked the peephole. Standing in the snow was a woman wrapped in a thick charcoal coat, a knitted burgundy scarf thrown over her shoulder. Her hair, deep auburn, almost copper, was tied in a loose bun, snowflakes clinging to the strands. Her eyes were a striking, intelligent hazel behind rectangular glasses, sharp enough to cut through a lie, but warm enough to draw trust from strangers. Mila Rowan, independent investigative journalist, 32, known online for exposing corruption in rural industries and forgotten border towns. She had a reputation for tenacity. People joked she could smell a cover-up from 5 states away, and a dry, sardonic humor that made her both admired and underestimated. Evan opened the door. "You're far from any city newsroom." Mila stepped in, brushing snow from her coat. "I heard Iron Peak was lovely this time of year," she said dryly. Then she glanced at Aurora. Their eyes met. Pain, recognition, and unfinished business flickered between them. "Aurora, I'm sorry it's under these circumstances." Aurora stood. "You said Rowan sent you something." Mila nodded, removing her gloves, revealing hands ink-stained from constant note-taking. "He contacted me a week before he died. Not just once, 3 times. The last message was almost frantic." She opened her satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope, worn and creased. "He said if anything happened to him, I had to make sure this reached someone who could help." Aurora trembled, but Evan steadied her with a gentle nod. Mila handed him the envelope. Inside were several pages of notes, a map of Frostfall Lake, and a USB drive with Rowan's handwriting scrawled across it. "Wintercore evidence. Secure." Mila continued. "Project Wintercore. That's what he found. Pike Minerals has been under federal suspicion for years, but no one ever got close enough to prove anything. Rowan did. Or he came close." "What is Wintercore?" Evan asked. "An off-the-record disposal program," Mila said. "Officially, nothing. Unofficially, a large-scale effort to bury hazardous waste where no one would ever find it. Underground systems, abandoned military storage networks, places forgotten by time or sealed from public access." "Like those tunnels under Frostfall Lake," Evan murmured. Mila nodded grimly. "Exactly like those tunnels. And Aurora's land?" She pointed at the map. "Sits on top of the most convenient entrance." Aurora felt her breath catch. They killed Rowan to stop him. "And now they want your land to bury the rest of their mistakes," Mila said softly. The room fell silent. The wind outside moaned like an old spirit searching for something it had lost. Evan slipped the USB into his pocket. "We need to go to the sheriff." Mila snorted, not unkindly. "Sheriff Rudd? He's been in Pike's pocket since before the mine renovation. And Mercer?" She shook her head slowly. "I warned Rowan about him." Evan stiffened. "You think Mercer's involved?" "Not by choice," Mila said. "He's not the type, but coercion comes in many forms." Aurora whispered. "He avoided Rowan's case. He avoided mine." "And he avoided last night," Evan added. "Convenient." Lila tugged on Evan's sleeve. "Are we safe here?" Magnus pressed against her, protective as a wall of fur and muscle. Evan knelt to her height. We're safe as long as we're together. Magnus won't let anything happen to you. Magnus woofed softly, tail sweeping the floor, but Mila's face remained tense. They know Aurora refused to sell. They know Rowan's research wasn't fully destroyed. They know the tunnel entrance is compromised. We're running out of time. Aurora sat heavily on the couch. What do we do? Evan straightened, resolve forming like ice hardening in winter air. First, you two stay here tonight. Mila too. No one goes out alone. Magnus will alert us if anything approaches. Magnus barked once, affirmative. Mila raised an eyebrow. And you? I'm going back to that hatch at first light, Evan said. If they're using those tunnels, I want proof. Aurora reached for his arm. It's dangerous. So is letting Pike keep control of this mountain, he said gently. We need answers. Rowan tried to expose the truth. I won't leave his work unfinished. Mila met Evan's eyes. I'm coming with you. He didn't argue. He sensed the same fire Rowan must have trusted. Outside, the snow thickened, swirling in eerie spirals as if the world itself sensed the gathering storm. Evan locked the cabin door, securing it with a bar of metal he rarely used. Magnus lay across the threshold like a loyal sentinel. Later that night, long after Aurora and Lila had fallen asleep, and Mila sat quietly reviewing Rowan's notes by the crackling fire, Evan paced near the window again. The forest beyond the glass seemed peaceful, too peaceful. And though he could not see them, he felt eyes watching from the tree line, cold, calculating, waiting for dawn. Dawn in Iron Peak came late in winter, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise over a land heavy with secrets. A pale gray light seeped over the mountains, filtering through the towering firs that bordered the northern ridge, their branches dusted with fresh snow. Frostfall Lake, still locked in its icy slumber, exhaled a thin veil of mist that drifted across the water in slow, spectral waves. The world looked suspended, quiet, sharpened, as if holding its breath for what was coming next. Evan Calder moved through the clearing with deliberate steps, eyes steady, breath forming soft plumes in the frigid air. Magnus trotted ahead, nose low, scanning the ground with the seriousness of a soldier surveying a battlefield. Mila Rowan walked beside Evan, clutching a camera with frozen fingers, her auburn hair tied into a messy bun beneath a wool cap. Her hazel eyes flicked constantly across the tree line, alert and calculating. Storm coming again? Mila asked, her voice muffled by the scarf around her neck. Evan glanced at the sky, a dark bruised smear gathering toward the west. Seems like it. Convenient, Mila muttered. Bad weather always helps people who don't want to be seen. Magnus stopped abruptly, his tail stiffened. Evan crouched. He's got something. They followed Magnus to the rusted hatch near the lake, the one Rowan had marked in his notes. Yesterday, Evan had left it untouched. Today the snow around it looked disturbed. Lines, tracks. Something dragged, something carried. Mila snapped a photo. These prints are from last night. Evan nodded. We weren't alone. The hatch handle, frosted before, now bore the faint warmth of recent contact. Evan touched it with a gloved hand. The steel creaked softly, resisting, but not locked. Magnus huffed, a low, meaningful sound. Evan pressed a hand to Mila's arm. We go slow, careful. If there's activity, they'll have alarms, maybe motion sensors. Understood. They pulled the hatch open. A cold draft rose from below, air that hadn't touched sunlight in decades. A metal ladder disappeared into a tunnel of darkness. Evan descended first, flashlight gripped tight, Magnus following after a brief hesitation. Mila came third, closing the hatch quietly behind them. The tunnel walls were reinforced steel, aged and stained but undeniably modernized. Light flickered faintly from wiring along the ceiling. Someone had restored power. Mila exhaled. So Rowan was right. He was more than right, Evan said. This place is active. Magnus sniffed along the floor, leading them deeper. The air smelled faintly chemical, sharp, artificial, wrong. Mila grasped a handkerchief to her nose. They turned a corner. A soft mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. Lights, small, industrial ones, glowed along a corridor where storage rooms branched like veins. Evan approached the nearest door and pushed it open slightly. Inside sat metal crates, rows of them, unlabeled, sealed, stacked high. Mila lifted her camera. If these hold what I think they do. A sudden clink echoed down the tunnel. Silence followed. Magnus froze, ears pricked. Evan gestured for Mila to move behind him. They stepped around the corner cautiously. A motion sensor light blinked once overhead. Then a siren blared, sharp, violent, deafening. Red warning lights flooded the corridor. Magnus barked sharply, warning them to run. Footsteps thundered above them, several sets, heavy boots, multiple people. Evan's heart kicked into overdrive. They're sealing the place! Move! They sprinted down the tunnel. Mila clutched her camera, breath ragged. Magnus bounded ahead, guiding them through the maze of corridors. Behind them, a metallic roar echoed. Mechanical arms sliding into place, doors slamming shut one after another. The whole structure trembled as though something massive had awakened. Mila shouted over the noise. "They're trying to trap us!" "No," Evan said grimly. "They're trying to bury us." The floor rumbled. A violent shudder shot through the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling. Magnus barked and pushed Evan toward the right passage. "That way?" Mila gasped. "He's never wrong," Evan said. They followed Magnus into an older section of the tunnel. Rustier, narrower, the steel warped from age. The sirens blared behind them, and above their heads, deep mechanical thuds echoed. The unmistakable rhythm of explosive charges being armed. Evan realized the truth instantly. They planted charges across the whole system. Mila's eyes widened. They're collapsing the tunnels. They don't want evidence left. Magnus skid to a stop at a junction and barked furiously at a service ladder that led upward. Evan didn't question. "Climb!" Mila went first, Evan following, Magnus scrambling behind with surprising agility for his size. The tunnel shook again, more violently this time, as the explosives above them detonated in rapid succession. The sound roared through the shaft like thunder trapped underground. Dust, metal fragments, and cold air blasted upward. Mila cried out as the ladder vibrated wildly, but she held on. Evan gritted his teeth and climbed faster, pushing her up. "Keep going! We're almost—" The ladder jolted. A shockwave hit the shaft. A mass of debris crashed into the lower rungs, twisting them, bending steel like paper. Magnus barked in panic. Evan shielded him as the shockwave faded. "Go!" Evan urged. They reached the top of the shaft, just as the tunnel below collapsed completely with a roar that shook the snow above. Mila shoved the rusted hatch door open, and all three burst into the blinding daylight, tumbling out onto the forest floor. A plume of snow shot into the air behind them, as the ground trembled and a muffled explosion rippled beneath the earth. For a long moment, they lay there, breathing hard, staring at the white sky. Mila was the first to speak, her voice hoarse. "They tried to kill us." "Not just us," Evan said quietly. "They tried to erase everything. Everything Rowan found." Magnus pressed against Evan's side, trembling slightly but alive, alert, loyal, furious. Evan placed a steady hand on the dog's head. "Good boy." The forest around them seemed colder than before. Then Mila's gaze hardened. "Mercer," she said softly. "Someone tipped Pike off. Someone knew we were coming." Evan didn't want to believe it, but the truth was staring him down like a loaded weapon. Mercer had been missing from every moment that mattered. Avoidant, nervous, always late, always just out of reach. Aurora and Lila were vulnerable. They had to get back. Evan rose to his feet. "We go to the cabin, now. We regroup, then we take this to the state level. Pike just made this federal." Mila stood beside him, brushing dirt from her coat. Rowan wanted the truth to come out. "And it will," Evan said. His voice was steady, cold, resolute. "Even if they bury the mountain trying to stop it." Magnus barked once in agreement. The wind picked up. Snow swirled around them, as though the forest whispered its warning. They were no longer just witnesses. They were targets. And Iron Peak's deepest secret had just erupted from the shadows. A storm was gathering again over Iron Peak, swirling like a white crown around the mountain's rugged shoulders. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened into a heavy bruise of gray and violet, promising another night where the wind would speak in howls and the snow would fall in sheets. Frostfall Lake shimmered under that darkening sky. Half glass, half cracked mirrors, its icy surface groaning softly as temperatures dropped. Evan Calder felt the pressure in the air long before the disaster struck. Instinct, honed from years in Denver PD, told him storms rarely came alone. Trouble liked to walk in pairs, weather outside, danger inside. And today, danger had slipped inside the heart of Iron Peak without making a sound. He and Mila Rowan had just returned from the collapsed tunnel when they noticed something wrong. The cabin door was ajar, just a crack, but enough to make Magnus stop dead, his hackles rising. Evan froze, heart slamming like a fist in his chest. He pushed the door fully open. "Aurora?" he called. "Lila?" The cabin answered with silence. A mug lay shattered on the floor. Lila's mitten was near the hearth. The blankets were tossed aside. No blood, no signs of a long struggle, just the quiet surgical emptiness left behind when someone knew exactly what they were doing. Mila whispered, voice shaking with fury. "They took them." Evan nodded slowly, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "And Pike won't hide them far. He needs Aurora alive." "Why?" Mila asked. Evan held up Rowan's notebook, tapping the small map where Aurora's property connected to the tunnel entrance. "She's the last obstacle. The land is her signature alone. If she refuses, Pike knows we're heading to state authorities." Magnus growled, pacing. Then Evan found it, tracks in the snow, heavy boot prints, drag marks faint but visible, and farther out, near the shore of Frostfall Lake, the indentation of a boat being pushed onto the ice. Evan inhaled sharply. "He took them onto the lake." Mila paled. "The ice is unstable. That's why he chose it," Evan said. "If anything happens, he'll blame the storm." Magnus barked once, sharp, focused, as if telling them time was slipping through their fingers. Evan ran to the small shed behind the cabin. Inside sat an old rescue boat, barely functional, wood-worn, metal rusted, yet still capable of crossing frozen water if handled with skill. He and Magnus had used it once to reach an injured hiker stranded on the far side of Frostfall. Today, it would carry them towards something far more dangerous. Mila climbed in with her camera tucked against her chest. "If we don't return," she said, "I want whatever's on this camera to be found." "You're returning," Evan replied, starting the small engine. "All of us are." The boat scraped across ice and slush as it moved toward the lake's center, where faint shapes flickered through the snowy haze. The wind pushed against them like a living thing. Snow spiraled sideways, stinging their skin. The lake creaked beneath them, deep and mournful. Halfway across, Magnus lifted his head and barked sharply. A second boat emerged from the swirling white, dark, metal, and newer. On it stood a tall man bundled in a heavy black coat, posture rigid and unyielding. Pike, the boss, the orchestrator of Rowan's death. His face was angular, cold, eyes like pale stones beneath a fur-lined hood. A man who built his empire on 1,000 small lies and a few devastating truths. Near his feet sat Aurora, wrists bound behind her but unhurt. She looked terrified, yet steady. Shoulders drawn back, face set with the quiet courage of someone who had already survived too much. Lila clung to her, pressed tight against her side, cheeks red from cold, breath trembling in little bursts. Pike shouted over the howling wind, "Turn around, Calder! This doesn't concern you." Evan slowed the engine, but didn't stop. "You crossed a line when you came into my home." Pike sneered. "I crossed nothing. Vale's land belongs to us. One signature and this whole mess goes away." Aurora raised her chin. "I'll never sign." Pike's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Then the lake decides your fate." At that moment, an ominous crack echoed beneath them, like a spine snapping. The ice, thin here, treacherous. Pike lost his footing briefly and the boat wobbled, sliding closer to a fracture line shimmering beneath the surface. Evan yelled, "Stay away from the cracks!" But Pike wasn't listening. He waved at his men, 2 shadows behind him, ordering them to steady the boat. The wind gusted harder, pulling snow into angry swirls. Magnus sensed the shift before anyone else. He growled low. Then he leapt. The German Shepherd flew across the small gap between the boats, 4 powerful legs striking down on Pike's deck with a thud. The sudden weight shift made the men stumble. Lila gasped. Aurora instinctively shielded her daughter. Magnus barreled into the nearest thug, knocking him down before he could grab Aurora. The second man swore, reaching for a rope. Pike himself struggled to stay balanced as the boat tilted dangerously toward the thinnest patch of ice. "Mila!" Evan shouted. "Hold on!" He accelerated. Their old rescue boat rammed Pike's vessel from the side, not violently, but with enough force to jolt Pike off balance. The lake cracked louder, long fissures spiderwebbing underfoot. Evan climbed onto Pike's boat in one swift movement. The deck was slick with ice, each step threatening to send him sliding into the freezing abyss. The wind whipped around them, pulling at coats, clothing, resolve. Pike swung at Evan first. A clumsy, rage-powered punch. Evan ducked it easily. The second hit was more controlled, catching Evan at the shoulder. Pain shot through his arm. He retaliated with an elbow to Pike's ribs, driving the breath out of him. Aurora cried out, "The ice! It's breaking!" She was right. The lake groaned, a deep, ancient sound that vibrated through the wood of both boats. Long cracks yawned outward inch by inch. Pike lunged again. "You think you can stop this?" Evan held his ground. "I already have." The two collided on the slick deck, boots sliding, fists striking glancing blows. The fight was raw, desperate, a battle of wills as much as strength. Each movement risked sending them both into the freezing water. Magnus barked furiously, circling the two fallen thugs to keep them from interfering. A sudden gust drove Pike backward. His boots slipped on the icy plank. For a brief, suspended moment, he teetered on the edge of the boat, arms flailing, inches from the cracking ice below. Evan grabbed Pike's coat, not to save him, but to control the fall, and slammed him down onto the deck, pinning him. Pike groaned, limbs sprawled, wind knocked from his chest. It was enough. Evan bound his wrists using the rope one of the men dropped. Aurora rushed to Lila, hugging her tightly. Mila steadied Magnus, calming the growling dog. Evan rose slowly. "It's over, Pike." Pike glared up at him, defeated but still writhing with bitter rage. "You don't know what you've done." Evan looked out across the lake, at the storm, the fractured ice, the small family huddled against the cold, and Magnus standing like a sentinel carved from stone and loyalty. "Yes," Evan said quietly. "I do." He signaled Mila. Together they secured both boats and guided them back toward the safer part of the frozen lake, where the ice was thicker. Behind them, Frostfall Lake groaned again, its secrets shifting beneath the sinking temperature, waiting for dawn, waiting for justice. Tonight, at least, the mountain breathed easier. Morning came slowly to Iron Peak, as though the sun itself was hesitant to step across the wounded silence left behind by the night's violence. Frostfall Lake shimmered faintly beneath a veil of pink-gold light, its fractured ice glowing like stained glass. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed in a crisp stillness. The mountains stood solemn and ancient, their peaks brushed by the first rays of dawn, watching over a town that, unknowingly, had been pulled back from the edge of ruin. Evan Calder stood on the porch of his cabin, breath rising in soft clouds as he looked toward the lake. His coat was torn at the sleeve, and fatigue pressed into the lines around his eyes, but there was a quiet steadiness in his posture, a resolve forged in the storm. Magnus sat beside him, tail curled neatly around his paws, head lifted high. His amber eyes scanned the snow, as though expecting danger to return at any moment, though the morning bore no sign of it. Behind them, Aurora and Lila rested inside the cabin, wrapped in blankets, emotionally drained, but safe. Mila had stayed awake through most of the night, writing notes, organizing files, copying Rowan's evidence to multiple devices. She moved with the determined precision of someone who understood the gravity of what they were about to do. The sun rose higher, revealing the events of the previous night, etched into the ice like scars. Evan turned toward Mila as she stepped outside, holding 3 folders thick with documents. "It's all here," she said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Every file Rowan gathered, every image you and I took in the tunnels, every recording I made on the boat." Evan glanced at the folders. "And the camera?" "Already duplicated," Mila said. "I sent a compress set to a secure editor contact at the Denver Chronicle. They'll keep it sealed unless we give the command." Evan nodded. "Good." Mila leaned against the railing, exhaling. "Pike's men won't be able to hide behind corporate lawyers once this goes to the state. Environmental crimes, hazardous waste, attempted murder, conspiracy with local law enforcement. It's enough to bury them for life. Evan's jaw tightened. They deserve worse. Magnus nudged Evan's hand, as if reminding him that anger, no matter how earned, had to remain controlled. Just then, the crunch of tires on snow echoed from the road below. A dark SUV approached slowly, carefully navigating the icy path. Evan stiffened, hand drifting instinctively near his belt, though he carried no weapon. The car stopped. A man stepped out. Late 50s, tall, wearing a black winter coat, and a badge clipped near his collar. His face was weather-beaten, marked by years of service, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "Special Agent Carter Reeves," the man introduced himself. "State Bureau of Environmental Crimes." Mila blinked. "You got our message fast." Reeves nodded. "Your email was urgent." His gaze shifted to Evan. "You must be Calder." "I am." "Your reputation preceded you," Reeves said mildly. "Denver PD spoke highly of you back in the day." Evan didn't respond. Words from that past life still felt raw. Reeves surveyed the area, the lake, the small cabin. Then he lowered his voice. "Where's Pike?" Evan motioned toward the back of the cabin. "Bound and under watch. 2 of his men are tied up near the shed. They're cold, but alive." Reeves exhaled. "You did the right thing restraining them. The sheriff's department here is compromised. We've suspected for a while." He lifted a tablet and began logging notes. "We'll secure the suspects, then move in on Pike's offices and storage sites. Once we process your files, this entire operation collapses." Magnus barked once, a short, decisive sound. As Reeves's team began arriving, another SUV, then 2 snowmobiles, Aurora stepped outside, Lila bundled against her side. The cold reddened their cheeks, but their expressions were steadier now, as if dawn itself had given them permission to breathe again. Aurora approached Reeves cautiously. "Agent Reeves, does this mean it's over?" Reeves softened slightly. "It means you're safe now, Ms. Vale, and it means your husband's work didn't vanish. He'll be vindicated." Lila looked up at the tall agent. "So, Dad was right?" she whispered. Reeves knelt, meeting her eyes gently. "Yes, he was very brave." Lila nodded, clutching Magnus's fur. As Reeves's team escorted Pike and his men away, another vehicle pulled up, a county patrol truck emblazoned with the Iron Peak emblem. For a moment, Evan tensed, expecting trouble. But stepping out wasn't Sheriff Rudd. It was Deputy Hank Mercer. He looked exhausted, face ashen, hair unkempt. His eyes carried guilt like a weight dragging him downward. He stopped a few feet from Evan, hands raised, not defensively, but surrendering. "I'm not here to cause problems," Mercer said softly. Reeves's agents circled cautiously, hands near their sidearms. Mercer swallowed. "I want to confess." Evan exchanged a quick look with Mila. Aurora stepped back protectively, keeping Lila behind her. Mercer's voice cracked. "Pike, he had leverage on me, something from years ago. At first it was small things. Ignore certain calls, file reports late, nothing major, but then he escalated. When Rowan died," Mercer shut his eyes. "I wanted to reopen the case, but Pike threatened to destroy my family." Reeves crossed his arms. "So you looked the other way." "I did," Mercer whispered, "and it's haunted me since." Mila's gaze sharpened. "You tipped Pike off about Aurora." Mercer nodded, tears freezing on his lashes. "I did, but I regretted it the moment I heard her voice on the emergency call. I didn't think it would go this far." Evan stared hard at the deputy. "Regret doesn't fix what you broke." "No," Mercer said, "but I can tell the truth, all of it, under oath." Reeves stepped forward. "You're prepared to testify against Pike Minerals, the sheriff, anyone involved?" Mercer nodded again. "Yes." Reeves signaled 2 agents. "Take him into protective custody. His testimony may help clean up this entire department." As they guided Mercer into the SUV, Evan felt the tension in his chest loosen. Not forgiveness, but closure. Iron Peak had waited a long time to purge the rot hiding beneath its snow-covered calm. Hours later, as the state vehicles rolled out one by one, the mountain quiet returned. Only Evan, Aurora, Lila, Mila, and Magnus remained in the clearing. Aurora approached Evan slowly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Evan replied. "You fought just as hard." A fragile smile touched Aurora's lips. I think I can finally breathe again. Lila tugged at Evan's coat. Will you stay in Iron Peak? Evan looked across the lake, where dawn had now grown bright and bold, ice sparkling like 1,000 prayers frozen in motion. I think I will. Mila walked up, stuffing her camera back into her satchel. The State Bureau wants a formal statement, but after that, she arched a brow. Iron Peak is going to need someone to help rebuild trust, and the K9 unit here is practically non-existent. Evan blinked. They offered me a position? Mila smirked. More like begged for it. Magnus barked, tail thumping proudly. Aurora laughed softly. Magnus will become a legend around here. He already is, Lila said, hugging the dog tightly. Evan looked at the little family before him. Aurora, who carried grief with grace. Lila, who found hope even in the coldest storms. And Magnus, whose loyalty had held them all together. He felt something warm settle inside his chest. A slow unfreezing he hadn't realized he was waiting for. Iron Peak was no longer just a refuge. It was a new beginning. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine, ice, and distant wood smoke. The sun climbed higher, lighting the snow in shades of amber and rose. And for the first time in a long time, Evan felt at peace. He placed a hand on Aurora's shoulder. Let's go inside. We've got a lot to rebuild. Aurora smiled, soft, hopeful, touched by the first true warmth of a long winter ending. Magnus trotted ahead, leading them all back inside as dawn broke fully across Iron Peak. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with bright flashes or dramatic signs. Sometimes they come quietly through the courage of a loyal dog, the kindness of a stranger, or the strength we discover only when life grows cold. Just like Evan, Aurora, Lila, and Magnus, we all walk through storms we did not choose. Yet even in those moments, God does not leave us alone. He guides us, protects us, and sends help in ways we often do not expect. In our everyday lives, we will face challenges that feel heavy, decisions that test our faith, and days that seem darker than they should. But if we hold on to hope, trust in His timing, and believe that He is working behind the scenes, we will find our way through every valley. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us what you believe in, and remember to subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and love. May God bless you and your family, always. And if you feel grateful for the quiet miracles He has placed in your life, type Amen in the comments.